What is really a very, very important hearing. I think although many would agree that the financial stability crisis appears to have passed, clearly economic recovery has yet to take hold. Unfortunately, since this administration has taken office, we continue to be mired in double-digit unemployment, and 3.5 million more of our fellow citizens have been put on the unemployment rolls. We know that we have the highest level of bank failures that we've had, I believe, since the early 90s, 140 last year, costing the Deposit Insurance Fund $36.5 billion. We know that for only the second time in history, the Deposit Insurance Fund in September went into the red. The taxpayers of this nation are being oppressed. We have now seen in just the last 2 years the federal deficit increase tenfold. We know that we are on a pathway now under this administration and this Congress to triple the national debt in the next 10 years, and it's just a matter of time before they are knocking on the door of the taxpayer yet again to bail out the Deposit Insurance Fund. So we can afford no more bank failure. So I think it is important that we examine what is the cause and also examine and try to understand why does there still appear to be a relative dampening of lending activity that is out there. It is interesting as we look at the case that is before us, and I read, I believe it was from yesterday's Chicago Tribune. I look forward to Mr. Kelly's testimony. I assume that they got it right, but reading from the 20th edition of the Chicago Tribune, quote, he, referring to Mr. Kelly, had stashed $896 million in the preferred stock of government-sponsored mortgage lenders, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, partly to fund acquisitions. This would be the biggest mistake of Kelly's career. At the time, regulators had created numerous incentives encouraging banks to invest in the so-called GSEs. They were deemed about as risky as government bonds and were treated favorably when it came to evaluating a bank's capital. Again, another data point on how the GSEs have simply wreaked havoc with this economy and how the regulators were actually pushing their paper, creating exemptions for them. And speaking of exemptions, as we continue to look at how shocking a number of bonuses are, how about the bonuses for those who run the GSEs? We are paying more money for them to lose more money. Why was it that the administration waited till Christmas Eve to simultaneously announce that they are lifting the cap on taxpayer exposure to Fannie and Freddie? Apparently $400 billion wasn't enough. Apparently they hadn't wrecked enough banks already. Lifting taxpayer exposure at the same time they were announcing $6 million bonus packages for their chief executive officers, $42 million for other execs. Those are the bonus structures that I want to be taking a look at. So I'm glad that we're having this hearing. Another thing we need to look at is why is there a dampening of lending activity? Well, I talked to bankers in the 5th Congressional District of Texas that I have the honor and pleasure of representing in Congress. I talked to them all over East Texas. For example, I speak to Milton McGee, President and CEO of Henderson Citizens Bank Shares in Henderson, Texas. Quote, I think the primary reason we are not seeing much commercial lending is the uncertainty with what is coming out of Washington. The small business owner doesn't know what health care costs are going to do to him, plus any new taxes as a result of the ever-increasing deficit. Business owners are not going to borrow and invest until they feel comfortable with the economic and political conditions. Way too many mixed signals are coming out of the administration. I hear that all over my congressional district. I hear it all over East Texas. I hear it all over America. If you want there to be greater lending activity, there's going to have to be less of a tax burden and more certainty about the regulatory burden on these businesses. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.